Today, we are diving into one of the most transformative technologies of our time, artificial intelligence. But we're not just looking at the hype. We're asking a really important question. Can this incredibly powerful new tool actually be used to, well, save the world? And our guide for this whole explainer is the book AI for Social Good. Okay, let's get into it.
You know, this quote just sets the stage perfectly. It frames AI not as just another piece of tech, but as a force, a generation-defining force that holds both our greatest hopes and our deepest anxieties. The stakes, as you can see, are unbelievably high.
So, to really understand the hope side of that equation, let's ground this in a real-world crisis. In early 2023, this massive earthquake caused just unimaginable devastation. I mean, when you're faced with a tragedy on that scale, the question has to be, what can technology actually do to help?
And that brings us to our first section. We're going to take a look at how AI is becoming this absolutely critical tool in disaster response, turning just massive amounts of data into real, actionable intelligence when every single second counts.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. In the chaos that followed the quake in Turkey, and in other disasters too, like the wildfires in Lahaina, AI labs could do something incredible. They could analyze satellite images at lightning speed. They created these super detailed maps that pinpointed the hardest hit areas, which let organizations like the Red Cross get aid to the right people in the right places way faster than ever before. This is what AI is amazing at, finding patterns at a superhuman scale and speed.
So how does this actually work? Well, it boils down to a pretty simple but powerful playbook. First, you get the eyes in the sky, the satellite photos. Second, you let the AI scan those images to find and map out all the destruction. And third, you use those maps to guide the relief teams on the ground. It's this perfect marriage of high-tech analysis and real, human, life-saving action. All right, so we've seen what AI can do, but how on earth does a machine actually learn to spot a damaged building from space? Let's pull back the curtain for a minute and take a quick, non-technical peek at the brains behind the whole operation. Okay, so at the heart of almost all modern AI is this idea, machine learning. And what it means is, instead of writing step-by-step instructions for a computer, you give it a goal. You feed it a ton of data, and it basically teaches itself. It learns from experience, kind of like we do.
And it turns out there are two main ways AI learns. With supervised learning, you're basically giving it the answer key. You feed it thousands of photos, each one labeled damaged building or not damaged. It learns by example. But with unsupervised learning, you just dump all the data on it, and it finds the hidden patterns itself. It's like a detective sifting through clues without even knowing what crime they're trying to solve.
Now let's zoom in even further. The most basic piece of this artificial brain is the neuron. And you can just think of it like a simple light switch. If it gets enough of a signal coming in, flick, it switches on and sends a message down the line. That's really it.
But here's where the magic happens. You don't just use one of those switches. You stack thousands or even millions of them into layers. And this creates what's called a deep network. The first layer of detectives might spot simple stuff like lines and edges. The next layer puts those together into shapes. The layer after that sees windows and doors, until the final layer, the lead detective, looks at all the evidence and goes, aha, that's a collapsed building.
And how does it learn? Well, the process has a fancy name, backpropagation, but honestly, the best way to think about it is like an orchestra conductor. The AI makes a guess. If the note is wrong, the conductor gives feedback, and every tiny connection gets adjusted, just a little. It does this millions and millions of times until the whole orchestra is perfectly in tune. So that's the how in a nutshell. But where did these ideas even come from?
You know, as futuristic as all this sounds, these ideas have a surprisingly long history. This stuff didn't just appear overnight. It was actually built over nearly 200 years of brilliant and sometimes, kind of eccentric thinking. This whole journey is just fascinating. It starts way back in the 1840s with Charles Babbage and Ada Lovelace, who basically dreamed up the first computer program. Fast forward 100 years, and you have Alan Turing asking that huge question, can machines think? Then, in 1986, we get that key orchestra tuning technique, backpropagation. And finally, in 2012, a model called AlexNet proves this all works on a massive scale, and that's what really kicks off the AI race we're in today.
And you can't tell this story without this moment. When IBM's Deep Blue computer beat the world chess champion Garry Kasparov, it was this huge psychological turning point. Kasparov himself was so stunned, he was convinced it had to be a human trick, but it wasn't. It was a clear sign that machines were stepping into a whole new era of intelligence.
Which brings us right back to where we started. We have this incredibly powerful tool, born from a long, long history of innovation. But just like nuclear power, its potential for good is matched by its potential for harm. We have to look at both sides of this coin.
The scale of this technology is, well, it's hard to wrap your head around. When the people running companies like Google and Microsoft are comparing AI not just to the internet, but to the discovery of fire, you know we're talking about something that could fundamentally reshape everything. And why? Because it changes how we create and process information itself.
But here is the peril, and it's perfectly shown by something like ChatGPT. It's so important to understand this. Its main goal isn't to be truthful. It's to be a convincing writer. It just predicts the next most likely word based on all the patterns it's learned. And that means it can, and it often does, state things that are completely false with total confidence, just because they sound right.
And this isn't just a theory, right? This actually happened. An experienced lawyer in New York confused ChatGPT's smooth writing with factual accuracy. He had it write a legal brief, and it came back with this beautiful document citing legal cases that were completely made up. He filed it without checking. The result? He was fined and publicly embarrassed. It's a perfect warning about the dangers of blind trust.
So we end right back where we began. We have this profound, world-changing invention in our hands, a tool that can map disaster zones and save lives, but can also lie and mislead with incredible confidence. It's not good or evil. It's an amplifier. The real question, the one that's going to define our future, is what part of ourselves will we choose to amplify?